This is a big one.
You're pregnant.
I'm pregnant. What was the one where Arnold Schwarzenegger got pregnant? What was that? I can't
remember the name.
Yeah.
But yes, I know the movie.
Basically, I have the same physique too. So basically, for people that know me or don't quite know me, like, I've done a bunch of stuff in terms of being like an entrepreneur and an investor and these different things. And one of the hats that I put on, a couple of years ago was dabbling in the world of Web3. And Web3, for those untrained, it's cryptocurrency. It is decentralized internet. It is NFTs. It's art on the blockchain.
It's ownership, right? If 1.0 is read-only internet, 2.0 is read-write, 3 is actually owning a piece of what's on the playing field.
So it's a very exciting frontier, and it's filled with a bunch of explorers that I would say it's a small number of people. In terms of people that are excited about digital art, call it 250,000 people or less. But it is, a serious group of people that are enabling a new canvas to take form in front of us. And I believe in my heart of hearts that for all of the bad press that we see about NFTs and all the scams, and don't get me wrong, there's tons of that shit. There is something true about if you had to close your eyes and wake up in 20 years, will collectible digital art be a thing? Of course it will, right? Like, and the blockchain is a perfect place to prove provenance, to prove scarcity. There's a lot of advantages there. Long story short, I launched something called Moonbirds, which was a PFP project.
I remember the text I got on the day of that launch.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
So we launched this, collectible NFT, and it skyrocketed way beyond what we had ever thought.
Yeah.
So to give you all a sense, from launch to 1 year in, over $1 billion has been traded in Moonbird's NFTs.
That's so wild.
And I did not expect that. I really didn't. But with that comes trading. And I have never lived the world of trading. I've grown companies to quite some size, but never publicly. I've never taken a company public. And when you take a company public, i.e. NASDAQ, New York Stock Exchange, you deal with the ups and downs and feedback from people that are now stakeholders of that particular company. It's different. This is an equity. Holding an NFT does not make you a shareholder. It's very different. But they still pay attention to what is the price of this NFT.
Yep.
So when the NFT goes up, times are good. People are happy. And when it goes down, people are not happy. I've had people truly hug me and say they've paid off their house because they sold one of my NFTs for $200,000 and they were stoked. And it was like tears kind of hugging. I've had people basically tear me apart saying, I am the other person on the other side of that equation that bought that NFT for, let's call it whatever, 50,000, not 75,000, 10,000, doesn't really matter. It's all relative to how much that person has as an individual. And how are you going to fix this? Because NFTs are down and they need to go up, right?
Right.
And some of it is on, what we build to try and build bigger and better things for the ecosystem and try and hopefully prove that we are a company here for the long term. It has taken a serious emotional toll on me as an individual. I have had many, many sleepless nights. I've had anxiety like I've never had before. I've had to work with therapists, and I've had to reach out to my primary care physician and get anti-anxiety medicine, which I've never had to do before. I have had some dark moments, with some not dark like in suicide, but dark as in, it's destroyed me because I've always considered myself an honest person. I've never been here to screw anyone over.
You're also a very, I consider you to be an empathic feeler. Maybe the right word is you're a deep feeler.
I am
right?
a feeler, for sure.
If something like that is sitting with you, you take it very personally. And I remember when you had stomach issues for so long.
Oh my God, IBS related issues.
Yeah.
And so this year I've been, treated multiple times for, these types of issues with physicians, all kinds of things. They discovered, the high blood pressure thing was discovered because I have a brain aneurysm right now. It's on the smaller side and they're watching it and I'm fine. But those grow the more stress you're under, because the more blood pressure that builds up, the larger the aneurysm can grow. And so, as you can imagine, all these things hit you at once.
Yeah.
And so I felt overwhelmed. I felt like I couldn't go to work. I felt like I kind of just needed to reset, And Huberman, who I love, who's been on my podcast, Andrew Huberman, is a top 10 podcast now. Oh my God.
He's killing it.
Killing it. Love
Steve's
that guy.
doing such an amazing job of executing.
I don't think I've seen anyone better at doing monologues and the way that he can do them about scientific topics. I mean, just if you haven't subscribed to Huberman's podcast, I mean, it's along with Atia's, a top 5 medical podcast to subscribe to, along with Rhonda Patrick. I mean, they're all heroes. Huberman did a couple hour episode on ketamine therapy, and ketamine therapy, it's used for PTSD, it's used for severe depression, and it's used for anxiety. And it sounded really interesting. It rewires neural pathways, and Huberman's episode, highly recommend. I'm not a scientist, but he is. And he goes in depth about what it actually is doing on the brain. And I always thought of ketamine clinics as being these shady places, these places where, there are real people with real addictions that they treat. If you're hooked on everything from amphetamines to, any type of serious addiction problems, they see these types of people, and also people that are about to kill themselves, like really suicidal. Like if you go to an emergency room right now and you say, I'm going to end my life in the next 10 minutes, they will most likely treat you with some type of ketamine to just like get you out of that state. It's a very common emergency room Hail Mary to like get you back into a state of like just being, okay, I don't want to end my life right now. And now we can work this out, or take you to an institution where you can get help. So I was never there, but I got to the point where I was like, I need to do something dramatic and different. And I need to reboot because I can't take the comments I'm getting on Twitter.
Now, did you see the Huberman episode organically? Did someone send it to you? Organically.
Yeah,
You just came across it.
It just came across it, and I was like, oh, I've always been interested in ketamine. I'd heard about ketamine in a recreational setting. And, sadly, who was the friend?
Matthew Perry.
Yeah, Matthew Perry, just toxicology report came back and said that he was on ketamine when he drowned. But we can get into why that is in a minute. But
let's focus on your personal experience. And I'll just say also, ketamine and jacuzzis or pools or water do not mix.
Exactly.
There are multiple fatalities. Don't mix those two things.
Well, when you go under ketamine, you are literally sedating yourself to where they can give you surgery.
It's dissociative anesthetic.
Yeah. So what my doctor has told me, the ketamine doctor, she's an emergency room doctor that did my treatments, is she said to me that if you came, she was a 10 or 15 years emergency room doctor. And she goes, if you came in and you had like dislocated your hip, she goes, I would give you what they call a bolus dose. Is that what they call it when
a bolus is right. I mean, they're giving you a lot at once.
Basically. A lot at once. They just like push it all in, right?
Yeah.
And she's like, I would give you that to about like, I can't remember the exact X, but it was a multiple on what they give you for therapy to put you under so I can get that hip back into place. And then you wake up feeling fine. Unfortunately, with Matthew Perry, he took a dose that was equivalent of subconscious fainting, falling asleep, drowning type dose. And they said, the toxicology report, I read it, he had that level in him that would have put him in that state of kind of like passing out, right?
Yeah, drugs and water don't mix, folks.
Don't mix. Anyway, so it wasn't my point. It wasn't the fault of the ketamine. He was using it recreationally versus under supervision of a professional, which is what is needed. So I found this clinic in LA. They literally have the set and setting right. So they're all about like you come in, it's just beautiful, comfortable, peaceful music, really relaxing, reclining chairs, eye mask, because it's important to go inward. It's not about just getting this therapy and looking around the room. Music with like drums and beautiful, like sometimes I picked my own playlist. I did a little bit more like chanting, you don't want like lyrics or, anything to distract you. And they have you hooked up to a blood pressure cuff that measures throughout the time, a heart rate monitor, like really professional setting. It's called Golden Afternoon is the name of the clinic in LA.
It's an amazing name.
It's an amazing name. And the doctor there, top tier, school, emergency room doctor, as legit as they come.
Mm-hmm.
So I felt really comfortable because, a lot of this is about set and setting and comfort.
Yeah.
And
safety.
And safety. Yeah. So I went in there and I was like, I'm going to give this a shot because, Huberman convinced me that this can help me with anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I laid down in this comfortable chair, turned on the heating, like they have a heating element in the chair, tilts you back a little bit, put on my noise canceling headphones. They gave me an IV, and IVs does sound hardcore, but for people like you and me that do IVs or do like blood draws like every other week, who cares? Like, I don't care about this shit, but it does sound hardcore to most people.
Mm-hmm.
They gave me an IV, and, I closed my eyes and I went to a place, man. I went to a place, and it's a beautiful place, and it made me, over multiple treatments, and I did 8 in total, and they normally do 6 for depression, which is really interesting because she said that it's typically anxiety is harder to treat than depression in her experience.
Mm-hmm.
And they gave me 8 in total, and you do 2 per week. And about halfway through, the best way I can describe it is, imagine that life is a series of crunches. And I say crunches like the ab workout.
Okay.
Whereas like nobody likes to work out their abs, right? Like, because abs are like, fucking ab day. Like, nobody wants to do that. And I didn't realize it, but I had a 35-pound weight on my chest the entire time I was doing ab workouts.
Mm.
And it took that weight off. And I still have, and it's been weeks later, a bit of grace and lightness to the way I'm carrying myself throughout life that is just a peace that I haven't felt since I was probably 10 or 12 years old.
Were you interacting with anyone in those sessions, or was it all internal?
No, it's all internal. So it's headphones on, music, eye mask. The entire session lasts for about an hour and a half. They have a camera that's watching you. If anything comes up, one time I had my music accidentally stop and I raise my hand, they're in there within 30 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
They bring you hot tea when you're done. They let you take your time to slowly kind of like come to, and then you can literally walk out of there and carry on with your day.
Mm-hmm.
And the first session, I was like, okay, that's beautiful. Second session was a little difficult. Imagine it's kind of loosening up like the plaque in your brain and like rewiring circuits, and like it's not always going to be easy. But I remember the 6th session, I just walked out there and Dr. Jen came in and she goes, "How are you?" And I said, "I could run a marathon right now. I feel amazing. I feel like a weight has been lifted off my chest, and this is such important work that you do. Such important work, because it's not about I don't feel, there's not an addiction to the substance. I don't need to go back. Some people go back for boosters, depending on what they have. She told me that some people that have depression, they'll come back in, every 3 months, every 6 months. She says some people she never sees again.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of takes the anxiety and pulls it apart from your body so that you can see it for what it is, which is silliness, because life is play. Mm-hmm. And when you realize life is play and we're all here just trying to figure out our shit.
Yeah.
Why are we taking it so seriously?
Yeah, there's a lot that just does not matter.
It doesn't matter. We can just chill, man. It doesn't really matter.
So that
we have clean drinking water.
Yeah.
Like, what the fuck are we complaining about?
So the weight on the chest, was that something that you can't put words to, that you just felt release, and you don't need to get into details, but I'm just curious, or was there a content to it where you're like, oh, no, interesting?
Wasn't content. Content was beautiful. And I don't know if you've ever experienced this, Tim, I've never done ayahuasca, although at some point I would love to try it. But like, I opened my eyes and it was when the mask is on, and I was seeing things that were as high of fidelity as what we see today, like right now.
Yep.
Where you're like, I am in a room right now. And I felt very present. My dad's passed away. I felt very present with a father source there at times. I felt very connected. At one point, I saw the entire world and I saw how small I was. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, it immediately gave me this sense of just like gratitude for that, being that little speck, but also at the same time, not having to take and carry the burdens of the world on me for being that little speck. Mm-hmm. And so there's bits and pieces of that. But I would say at the end of the day, when you come out of it, it's not like you had this epiphany. It's more like Dr. Jen calls it the ketamine's time on, she calls it time on brain. How can we make this sit and do the rewiring on your brain and give you time on brain with the drug and the compound and let it do its work? And so it was a lot of surrendering. It was a lot of saying, you do what you want to do. I don't care where you take me emotionally, mentally, whatever. It doesn't really matter. It's time on brain with the compound. And after a certain number of sessions, you just feel this natural lift and lightness. And it felt like, I'm not a ballerina, big surprise, but it felt like a little bit of like walking through life is a little bit of a dance now than it is such a struggle.
It makes me super happy, man, to hear that.
It feels amazing.
And I remember getting the text, some of the texts from you, and I was excited to have this conversation, which we haven't had. This is the first time we're talking about it.
It is.
And I'll say a few things. The first is that I have seen a number of cases where ketamine therapy has changed or saved lives. So a friend of mine, for instance, who suffered from depression his entire adult life, had a similar experience to yours. And he went to a clinic, I believe it was in New York City, very well run. And he goes back once every 6 months for a single tune-up, let's just say,
a booster,
session.
Yeah.
And I actually know, also not going to mention their name, but someone we know as a mutual friend who you probably don't know also does this once every 3 to 6 months. And separately, I know someone who's in law enforcement who is heavily disincentivized from talking about mental health with his superiors because you will be put on leave generally if you even hint at that. And you're in certain professions, airline pilot, for instance, you're going to be put on leave. And it's
on leave is a nice way to say you probably
it's a nice way. It's a career risk to bring these things up, which puts many more people at risk, right? There should be better processes for this. But nonetheless, he was suicidal at one point. We're talking about somebody who was carrying around a firearm all day. And ketamine was an intervention that was incredibly effective for him for pattern interrupting. And I use that very literally because the pattern was a thought loop. This is personal. This is permanent. This is never going to change. And when you're able to at least interrupt that for a short period of time, you provide people with hope, or at least a window within which they can consider other options. So for acute suicidal ideation, also for chronic pain, very interestingly, ketamine is super interesting.
Yes. It's interesting you say that because Dr. Jen over at this clinic has told me she treated quite a few people for chronic pain as well, and it works quite well.
So I unexpectedly, because...
Have you done it?
So before I talk to anyone about anything like this, generally I am volunteering to be the monkey shot in this space. So several years ago, I did 6 sessions over 3 weeks.
Ketamine?
Yeah.
Oh, shit. Dude, why did you never tell me this?
I didn't realize I didn't tell you. So I did 6 sessions. This would have been...
With a mask on and like in the
In
music?
this particular case, it was music, but it was not mask on. The way that this particular clinic ran things was with video, which was very strange to me. But nonetheless, it was sort of naturescapes. And I was like, okay, well, this is new to me. I'll try it. And it ended up being supremely interesting. I was not going in with an acute condition, so it was hard for me to evaluate ultimately a lot of the efficacy. They found it very strange, and I found it kind of hilarious because they would do an intake each day of active sessions, and they would ask me to do various assessments for anxiety, and my anxiety levels were going up over time, which they found very confusing because you may have experienced a little bit of this. Ketamine can compromise your short-term memory in the short term, like after sessions. So you might like forget where your wallet is or forget where your backpack is.
I didn't have any of that.
Okay, so that can happen, and that happened to me. And it happened to be the case that while I was doing these sessions, because I shoehorned it into my schedule, I also had a number of huge podcasts coming up, like LeBron James and so on. And it was freaking me out that I kept forgetting shit. And so my anxiety was going up over the course of treatment, which was not typically
so
what
I did
they
the
say.
same thing. They gave me a whole like breakdown. It was 1 to 5 on, a bunch of different scales. I think it's a pretty standardized thing that they give you. I can't remember what the anxiety scales are.
Yeah.
But like mine went down to literally a 1 on all of them, or 0 on all of them, which is amazing.
It is amazing. And I want to mention a few other things. So I'm sure Huberman's episode is excellent for people who want to have a comprehensive overview of ketamine. I'm sure Huberman's is great. So listen to that first.
It's fantastic.
I also did an episode with John Crystal, Dr. John Crystal, who is the chairman of psychiatry at Yale, who did a lot of the seminal research with respect to ketamine as an antidepressant in humans. So the protocols that get used, which I think are generally like 0.5 milligrams per kilogram of body weight, et cetera, over X period of time with Y number of infusions.
Right.
Those are the protocols that he developed with his other investigators. And I want to mention a number of things just to make sure that I'm doing my safety first Ferriss duty. So the first is that part of the reason, and this is pure speculation, but I think that it was risky for Matthew Perry to use ketamine, is that he had a history of abuse. Ketamine can be very addictive for people who are unwilling or uneager to feel certain things. It's a dissociative anesthetic. So if you have, for instance, a history of alcohol abuse, it is, I would say, increasingly likely that you might abuse ketamine, which is why if someone were to consider ketamine therapy, I feel very strongly that it should be IV or intramuscular injection and not at-home treatment where you have access to, say, lozenges or a nasal spray.
Because there are companies that do lozenges at home. But I will say one thing, Tim, real quick, and I'll let you continue. I noticed my desire for alcohol go down.
Yep. So I think that can happen. And I'm just saying for folks who, for instance, may be coming out of or part of AA and they have issues with depression, my personal take after everything I've seen is that prior abuse of alcohol highly correlated to potential abuse of ketamine. And I would say furthermore, there are some urological risks if you use ketamine chronically. And alongside that, if you use ketamine chronically, and this is true for a lot of drugs, actually.
That's for snorting, though, right?
No, it's not for snorting.
You wouldn't get your logical track otherwise because it metabolizes in the liver.
Well, most people who consume ketamine recreationally,
they'll be their mouth, or
a lot of it'll be snorting of one way, of one sort or another. So they'll either have it it'll be in suspension in a liquid, or it will be a powder that they snort in the same way they would snort cocaine. A lot of people carry little lockets around their necks with ketamine. I've seen this a lot.
And by the way, that's not what I'm talking about here today.
No. I'm not.
But those are two very different things.
They are. So just to be very clear, ketamine therapy with IV or IM has a track record of being incredibly promising for a
trained physician.
For a number of other things. Yeah. But where some folks get lost is they go from instead of clinical setting, higher dose supervised, they bleed into more casual recreational use, in which case it's very important for me to say that ketamine can be very helpful for people with, say, treatment-resistant depression or chronic depression. If you use it chronically, though, it flips the other way, and it actually makes you predisposed to more depression. So it's just something for people to be aware of. Yeah. And as is true with so many things,
oh my God,
more is not better.
What was the drug that Michael Jackson died of? Do you remember the name of that?
I'm not sure. I think it was a synthetic opioid. Or
No. It was basically
some type of anesthetic.
Yeah. So
I'm not sure.
It was funny. I went and, because I'm old now, in my 40s, I went and had my first colonoscopy because you're supposed to do that shit,
Party time.
Have you done that yet or no?
I have, yes.
Yeah, so I went and did mine. And
by the way, this is very sad, but do not skip your fucking colonoscopies.
No.
A very good friend of mine, since we last spoke, Roland Griffiths, who's an amazing scientist from Johns Hopkins, he died of terminal cancer. And I had a long conversation with him a few days before he died, before I went to South America. He was completely razor sharp up until the end. And my recollection is that part of the reason that was caught too late is that he was a few years late in having his exam.
So I had mine done, and they caught a couple precancerous, as they do with most people these days.
Yeah, do your fucking screens.
And you got to do your screens. But anyway, long story short, when I was going in, the anesthesiologist came in the room, and he was kind of a funny guy. It was cool. I like those guys, you know?
Yeah.
And I asked him, I said, can I have the slow ramp? And he's like, what's the slow ramp? And I'm like, well, you just kind of get to me a little bit at a time, just like feel like going into that zone, you know?
Yeah.
And he's like, it's funny you say that. He's like, I'm giving you the same drug they gave Michael Jackson when he died. And I was like, oh, that's crazy. I'm like, why? And he's like, he was just addicted to it. And so he gave me the slow ramp. And I remember this feeling about probably, let's call it 30 seconds into it, where I felt like I was okay with dying. It was just like this moment of like, this is beautiful.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, this is what Michael Jackson was feeling right now. Propofol. Yeah, exactly.
Propofol.
That was it.
All right.
And so I get it, but this is like to the point of Matthew Perry dying in the pool. Like, this stuff puts you under. Yeah. It puts you under so that you can have surgery.
Yeah.
And that is what ketamine does as well. So
and ketamine, broadly speaking, is an incredibly well tolerated, safe drug. Part of the reason that ketamine is, I believe, listed in the World Health Organization's top 100 most essential medicines is because it is generally very well tolerated.
Yes.
And it does not suppress respiration.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Which is a huge one.
Right. Gigantic. And it's an incredible compound. And you just need to know the risk profile. And there are risk profiles for everything.
Of course.
You know, we have tequila and we have water in front of us. Water has a risk profile too. People die every year of hyponatremia because they drink too much water when they're training for or running in a marathon, and that causes disruption of sort of electrochemical signaling, and then boom, they drop. And people die every year.
You probably didn't hear about this, but there was a radio host DJ. Do you remember this? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Where they have these water drinking competitions,
and somebody died of overdosing on water.
This has happened many times, right?
It's so crazy.
As Paracelsus would say, the dose makes the poison, but sometimes the frequency and the use pattern makes the poison.
Yeah.
And I think ketamine is incredibly interesting.
Yeah.
And
especially because the when you get into the actual science behind it, we're not just using this as an escape. It's actually rewiring the brain.
Yeah.
And Huberman will get into that, the kind of neurology behind it and what's happening and why these are more lasting changes and why some people, not everyone, but some people can go and do this and they don't ever have to go back for a booster or anything else.
Yep.
And it changes them forever. So I don't know if I should get into this. Someone
we can always cut it.
Well, so someone very close to me, she was close to suicide.
Mm-hmm.
And she's a dear friend. She's a sweetheart of a person. And she was the first time I'd ever heard of ketamine therapy. This was probably 4 years ago. And she said, I was about to take, close to taking her life. And she had heard about ketamine therapy. It was like kind of new at the time. And she paid for the 6-pack, the 6 sessions, the full 6. And she hated every single session. And it was funny when I talked to Dr. Jen at the clinic that I went to, she said, it's very common people that have depression, they don't enjoy the experience. And I thought it was fantastic. I loved the whole thing. But like when my friend said that at session 6, she heard a pop in her brain, like a physical pop.
It's like a psychic chiropractic adjustment.
Literally, the depression lifted, and she has been amazing ever since.
So wild.
And this has been like 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's like, I believe her. She's like doing insanely well now.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh my God, like, dude, so Tim, I just want to thank you for how much money and effort you've put into psychedelic research, because
thanks, man.
After experiencing this, I realized that there is something here.
Yeah.
And we don't have it figured out.
Yeah.
Obviously we don't. Like, we're in the baby stages, but 10, 20, 30 years with AI, maybe 10 years, like this will get figured out, and it will be largely because people like you help fund this type of research. So I just want to say thank you for that.
Thanks for saying that, brother. Yeah, I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I was so happy to see those texts.
Yeah.
I was so happy.
Well, I got to tell you, if you're in the LA area, and obviously you'll talk to her as a doctor, this is her advice, not ours, and you'll go through the whole screening process. But goldenafternoon.clinic, I think, is the website, and she is an amazing human, very caring, comes in pre and post, checks in on you, like a really well run facility. Depression, anxiety, PTSD, war veterans. All these people are going in to see her, and it's God's work, if wherever you believe in God or not.
There are some great clinics out there. I will say there are also a lot of fly-by-night clinics.
100%.
So do your homework.
Yes.
The one of the main advantages, or it is a main advantage of ketamine as compared to other psychedelics, is that in the United States it is currently legal.
Yes.
And that is a non-trivial advantage. And I will say that one question you may want to ask in doing your due diligence, if you consider this as an option, and I do feel after canvassing many different compounds, many different treatments, that for acute suicidal ideation, that ketamine is at the very top of the list. It is on a very short list of interventions that have incredible promise for at least creating the space for someone to consider treatment options. And the due diligence question that I recommend, and this is true for any type of drug-assisted therapy, it's actually true for surgeons too. It's true for doctors in general. Ask them what types of adverse events they've observed, what type of abuse potential they've observed. If their answer is, everything is always fine, we've never had an adverse event, that is a huge red flag.
Yes.
Anyone who has enough mileage, if they are a ketamine clinic physician, if they are an ER physician, they will be able to tell you what things look like when things go sideways.
Yes.
And how they handle those situations. And if they don't volunteer any of that, it means either they're inexperienced or they're delusional, generally.
100%.
And I'm giving people a bit of a break, or it means they're lying.
Yeah.
And in all three cases, you do not want to have anything to do with that particular practitioner.
By the way, I looked her up. She's Princeton.
Princeton.
Yep.
Go Tigers. Look at that.
That's where my doctor went with Princeton. So.
Phil Wolfson, for instance, has done a lot of writing on this. Do your homework. You are signing up for, let's just call it, psychoactive brain surgery. So to the extent that you would do your due diligence related to a surgeon who is going to be physically opening your head, carving a hole in your skull, and performing manual brain surgery, do a commensurate amount of homework on the person who is going to be providing you with compounds that have a significant impact on cognitive functioning, not necessarily only in the short term, but in the longer term.
Yeah.